you ever get the feeling that kids these days are just not all right? They're not okay, that they're more anxious, lost, kind of wayward, just not totally there, and it's, that we're not serving them, we're not helping them. And do you ever get the feeling that a lot of it has to do with school? Well, I want to get into that, right? Some of the realities, some of the statistics, some of the studies, and what I think the root causes are. So just to give you some stats, between 2009 and 2017, rates of depression rose by more than 60% amongst those ages 14 to 17, and 47% among those ages 12 to 13. Okay, and it isn't just a matter of diagnoses. The number of children and teenagers who are seen in emergency rooms with suicidal thoughts or having attempted suicide between 2007 and 2015 doubled. Okay, so they're not okay. There's your confirmation. All right, and I've got a printout of an op-ed from the New York Times, and I'll have that in the show notes. And I'm just going to read what it says here because they make a, Kim Brooks, the writer, made a salient point right here. It says, I've come to believe that the problems with children's mental and emotional health are caused not by any single change in kids' environment, but by a fundamental shift in the way we view children and child rearing. So it goes all the way down to the foundation, it goes down to the core. All right. Now, I talked a little bit about the school system and really what it's done. And what's happening now is that, like, for example, in New York, they created there was a white paper released by the government in New York called Birth to Five, and it talks about what kind of programs they're going to roll out to get kids on this head start. It's all about getting kids younger and younger into the education system. At first there was kindergarten, then there was pre-K, and then there's just preschool, and then the next thing it's going to be, can your kid write essays at age 2? All right. And the expectations of teachers and parents have just changed. So look, in 1998, 31% of teachers expected children to learn to read in kindergarten. By 2010, 80% of teachers expected that children learn to read in kindergarten. First of all, why does it matter if your kid can read by the age of 5? And then second, why the huge shift in 12 years? It's not like we all started learning how to read at 5 by 2010. It's not like there was something genetic. Just the expectations changed. And the expectations changed, and so the way that education was delivered also changed. Okay? And what's been happening more and more is that kids that can't pay attention and can't sit still are being called, they're being diagnosed with things like ADHD and ADD. And in fact, a lot of it just has to do with the growth curve of a child, the growth curve of their maturity. And so if you have a really young student, like the youngest kid in the class, they actually have a 30% higher chance of being diagnosed with ADHD just simply because they're not as developed. Okay, and the states across the United States have been pushing to make compulsory education younger and younger. Iowa recently took it to age 4. New York is creating programs for children starting at the age of 3. Okay, and they're making these programs more and more regimented and more about standard tests, STEM, more about college prep, right? And you guys know that this stuff doesn't go anywhere. And in fact, the studies have shown that any kind of Head Start program that you create will actually lose its gains by kindergarten because it's not like the kid retained it. And by the time everyone else is in kindergarten, they get caught up by the end of it. And pretty much everyone's back to square one by first grade, except the kids that were in the Head Start program have a fundamentally different kind of behavior than the kids that weren't. because they weren't with their parents. Okay, they were in school, and school messes kids up. Okay, and I can tell you that because the rates of depression are considerably higher for kids and teens that are in school. When they're on summer break, they're not as depressed. It's as simple as that. Okay, now where does the Head Start program come from? Well, it comes from the LBJ days back around 1965. So this was part of, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program, and in 1965 it provided the government preschool and nutrition programs to low-income children, and it was called the Head Start program. And so now the program is very large. It has a budget of over $10 billion as of 2019. And yeah, this is the program that the Brookings Institute has done research on, has found basically has no effect. But it's been this attitude that's been in place since the 60s, that the government's going to take care of our kids, and the government's going to take care of our schooling, and that everything's just going to work out. What's happened is that there's been a fundamental abdication of parental responsibility. Parents basically handed their kids over to the government, and before all this was in place, children were raised just fine. And people used to read the great works of literature, and they had very long attention spans. And America was actually quite literate in the first place in the 60s. And so this great social program, it got so big that it started just becoming the default option for people, right? People give the responsibility to the government grows, it gets more powerful, it gets more bloated, and now it's in a position where it's doing more harm than good, and people don't know what to do about it. And really, it's really going to be a person by person, family by family shift that's going to be needed for us to combat this, right? Because it's not going to be another reform or another program. That's actually the last thing we need. Okay, we need to either repeal a lot of this legislation, or just kind of just take our kids out of it. Just take our kids out of that game and start playing our own game, where kids can have an unstructured learning environment where it's not about being 4 years old and trying to catch up and trying to do math and read and write, because it's not about that. Because by the time they're 18, if they've got schooling for that long, if they've got great parents, they're going to learn all that, right?